Let's be clear about what the president is responding to, because many in this room want to talk about the president's response, but not what brought the president to responding.
Remember when President Trump straight up told us he was going to hell?
I think I'm not maybe heaven bound.
But he thinks that after this week, God is back on board.
That punchline lasted barely 42 seconds, yet the reaction it unleashed is still echoing everywhere. A single monologue on Saturday Night Live suddenly placed Donald Trump and Karoline Leavitt directly under a blazing spotlight, and by the time the show ended, the mood online had shifted completely. At first, people were laughing, sharing the clip like any other late-night joke, but within hours, the tone changed. Old screenshots began circulating again. Past interviews and statements were pulled from the archives and replayed across social media. What started as a quick comedic jab slowly turned into something far more uncomfortable for those involved. Instead of calm confidence, the response that followed sounded tense and irritated. The obvious question everyone started asking was simple. What exactly did the host say in those few seconds that triggered such a frantic wave of damage control? Because whatever the line was, it clearly struck a nerve that people were already familiar with.
I think it's frankly ridiculous that anyone in this room would even suggest that President Trump is doing anything for his own benefit. He left a life of luxury and a life of running a very successful real estate empire.
Search the county election hub in Georgia looking for ballots to back up President Trump's false claim that the 2020 election was rigged. Jesus, man, let it go. I mean, even Hitler stopped trying to get into art school at some point.
And before we go any further, if you are enjoying this breakdown, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because that support genuinely makes a difference. Now here is the interesting part about political messaging. It often falls apart the moment someone lines up your most memorable quotes and plays them back to back without the dramatic soundtrack or the usual spin. That is essentially what happened when Donald Trump and Karoline Leavitt became the focus of a carefully constructed comedic takedown. Instead of relying on wild exaggeration or invented jokes, the segment simply stitched together their own public words with precise timing. The result felt less like a random roast and more like a methodical examination where every punchline was built directly from statements the audience had already heard before.
Conference celebrating his first year in office, President Trump said that God was very proud of the job he's doing as president. Trump added that God was probably looking up at us right now, smiling from horn to...
The explosion that followed was not caused by some secret file being exposed or a hidden document suddenly appearing. What really set everything off was something much simpler and far more powerful. People began noticing the pattern. When viewers recognize a repeating pattern in public behavior, especially when they have already watched unfold over the years, it becomes difficult to ignore. In this case, the audience did not need brand new revelations to react strongly. They were reacting to familiar moments being connected in a way that highlighted how consistently the same story beats had played out again and again.
President Trump said that he will only negotiate with Democrats when they agree to reopen the government, adding that he will not be extorted. Except that one time he famously got extorted by that mattress actress Stormy Daniels.
Colin Jost approached the entire topic almost like a lawyer delivering a closing argument to a jury, except instead of citing legal codes, he relied on well-known clips, public comments, and viral moments that have floated around the internet for years. He never needed to stretch the truth about Donald Trump's habit of calling major media outlets corrupt while simultaneously dominating the attention of those same outlets every time he speaks. Jost simply presented that contradiction in a way that made it stand out clearly, suggesting that declaring war on the spotlight while constantly running toward it feels less like a political tactic and more like a performance staged for an audience. The focus then moved toward Karoline Leavitt, who has built her public profile by acting as a fast-moving defense line whenever Trump's most controversial moments erupt. She has challenged reporters directly, dismissed critical coverage as partisan spin, and repeatedly argued that opponents invent narratives out of thin air. The comedy flipped that argument by implying that if those narratives are being created somewhere, they are at least using crystal clear video supplied by the campaign itself. In the segment, her television appearances were treated almost like chapters from a fictional guidebook titled "How to Express Outrage About Everything Without Ever Missing Your Moment on Camera."
President Trump has been inviting world leaders to join his Board of Peace or be crushed by his Council of Destruction. Trump's Board of Peace consists of countries such as Russia and Saudi Arabia, which is like if Law and Order SVU starred Diddy.
Meanwhile, Michael Che leaned into that theme with a delivery so calm that it made every joke hit even harder. He pointed out how nearly every legal development connected to Trump gets presented by supporters in one of two ways. On some days, it becomes proof of a massive political witch hunt. On other days, the same event is framed like a badge of honor that shows he is being targeted for a reason. Che joked that the messaging strategy feels like a streaming platform that only offers one type of show. The genre is political persecution drama, and it keeps getting renewed for new seasons, whether the audience asked for another episode or not. Trump's long history of clashing with Saturday Night Live gave the segment an extra layer of irony. During his presidency, he frequently criticized the program for mocking him and accused it of bias, even though he himself hosted the show during the 2016 campaign. That background made the jokes land harder because complaining about a comedy show while benefiting from the attention it brings creates a contradiction that almost writes its own punchline. Jost returned to the larger idea that grievance itself has become part of the branding. He suggested that within Trump's political orbit, criticism is often treated as proof that you must be doing something right. That logic can sound convincing until comedians start listing the many times outrage appeared less like a principled stance and more like a predictable reaction. By stacking those moments one after another, the repetition itself became the joke.
Late night President Trump made hundreds of posts on Truth Social, including conspiracy theories, attacks on Democrats, and even a video of his cameo in Home Alone 2, which I hadn't seen in a while, and I have to say, the dialogue, it hits different now. Check it out.
Excuse me, where's Jeffrey Epstein?
Leavitt's role inside the Trump political ecosystem became a central piece of the satire because she represents what looks like a generational refresh of a familiar message. She is younger, extremely comfortable with media appearances, and quick to respond during interviews. Yet the arguments she delivers often mirror the same themes that have defined Trump's communication style for years. Che described the dynamic as a rebrand without a renovation, hinting that replacing the spokesperson does not really transform the structure if the foundation underneath stays exactly the same. Trump's past as a reality television personality on The Apprentice adds another layer of irony to the situation. A figure who built a career around televised confrontation now finds himself irritated when that same confrontational energy returns in the form of satire. The comedy suggested that once politics starts adopting the style and drama of entertainment, it cannot be surprised when entertainers begin critiquing it using the exact same playbook. Jost also highlighted how often Trump and his allies accuse mainstream outlets of dishonesty while eagerly appearing on networks that support their message. The humor came from presenting those two realities side by side, showing that condemning the media and relying on it can be part of the same strategy. In that framing, attacking the referee while continuing to play the game does not look like rebellion. It looks like carefully planned choreography.
And this judge, Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist. He was appointed by Barack Obama. His wife has donated more than $10,000 to Democrats, and he has consistently shown his disdain for this president and his policies, and it's unacceptable.
Right where I wanted to go about the idea that these people are all foreign terrorists, but Judge Boasberg was originally appointed by George W. Bush and then elevated by Barack Obama. I just feel like I should clear that.
Karoline Leavitt's recent media tour defending Trump during multiple legal battles added even more material for the segment. In interview after interview, she has insisted that investigations are politically motivated and portrayed critics as desperate actors trying to sabotage a larger movement. Che reframed that approach as almost automatic, joking that if gravity itself suddenly questioned the campaign, it would probably be accused of bias too. The exaggeration worked because it felt just close enough to reality to sound believable rather than absurd. The wave of reactions that followed the segment also seemed to follow a script everyone recognized. Trump allies quickly labeled the show irrelevant and disconnected from everyday Americans, which becomes a strange tactic when responding publicly only helps the clip spread further across the internet. Jost hinted at this dynamic by suggesting that outrage within Trump's orbit often acts like rocket fuel, pushing the very narratives it claims to reject even higher into the spotlight. Che then shifted back to Leavitt, noting how her confident interview style often projects total certainty. The satire implied that certainty becomes a little harder to maintain when confident declarations are placed next to archived footage that appears to contradict them. By placing those clips side by side, the comedians created tension without ever needing to add their own commentary.
Look at the circumstances surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
I've got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said,
as the segment continued, a larger theme started to take shape around the idea of predictability. Trump's political identity has long centered on disruption, dominance, and breaking the expected script. Yet the reaction pattern to criticism has gradually become very familiar. A critical comment appears, condemnation follows quickly, supporters rally behind him, and media coverage expands the story even further. Jost treated that entire sequence like a ticking metronome, hinting that even the outrage now runs on a schedule people can anticipate. Leavitt's defense of Trump often revolves around the argument that cultural institutions hold an unfair bias against conservative voices. Che reframed that by suggesting that if every organization you disagree with is labeled corrupt, eventually the list will include anyone holding a microphone. The joke landed sharply because it questioned whether a strategy built entirely around blaming outside forces can keep working forever. Trump's long battle with late-night comedy also played into the conversation. During his presidency, he once floated the idea that shows mocking him should follow equal time rules, similar to political broadcasts, a proposal that quickly collided with constitutional reality. Jost referenced that tension by pointing out that asking satire to be fair misunderstands the entire point of comedy. Comedy answers to timing and laughter, not campaign regulations. As the jokes continued, Leavitt was portrayed less like a personal villain and more like a symbol representing a communication strategy built around constant confrontation.
Spent so much time stalking Greenland like an absolute psycho. He's basically become a guy on a dating app. He's like, hey, Greenland, you look so good. And Greenland's like, haha, thanks. And Trump's like, seriously, I need you. I'd literally give $700 billion to be with you.
At this stage, Che suggested that the louder the backlash becomes, the more it reinforces the very caricature being mocked. In other words, the reaction itself can end up extending the joke rather than disproving it. The real strength of the roast came from the fact that it relied almost entirely on documented behavior instead of speculation. Trump's public remarks, Leavitt's televised interviews, and the campaign's own messaging are all easily available to anyone with an internet connection. Jost simply organized those scattered moments into a storyline that felt cohesive, turning separate clips into a single narrative arc. Che closed the loop by pointing out that in a time when politics often feels indistinguishable from entertainment, becoming the subject of parody is almost inevitable. The more central a figure becomes in national conversations, the more certain it is that comedians will eventually build jokes around them. If Trump's brand depends on dominating attention everywhere, then appearing regularly in comedy sketches is not necessarily an attack. It is a side effect of that visibility. After the segment aired, no policies suddenly changed and no campaign collapsed overnight. Trump continued campaigning, Leavitt continued defending him, and the news cycle kept moving forward as it always does. Yet the sting lingered because the humor was not inventing flaws, it was highlighting patterns. Jost and Che blended observation with punchlines so smoothly that the critique was hidden inside the laughter.
President Trump also complained about immigrants from countries like Haiti and asked, why can't we have some people from Norway instead? Or how about someone who's Norwegian and Haitian, like Times Square Elsa?
In the end, the segment did not uncover some hidden vault of secrets. What it exposed instead was a rhythm that has become extremely familiar in modern political communication. When outrage is directed at every critic, including comedians, it eventually starts losing the shock value that once made it powerful. The sharpest point of the entire segment was the suggestion that the true vulnerability might not be any single controversy, but the predictability of the reaction that follows. In a political culture obsessed with strength and dominance, being predictable is the one weakness satire can easily target. The timing of the jokes also made everything more explosive because the country is deep inside a tense election cycle where every narrative spreads instantly and can be weaponized within minutes. The Trump campaign frequently presents itself as embattled yet unstoppable, portraying legal challenges and media scrutiny as evidence of a massive threat. When satire steps into that storyline and treats it like a recurring sitcom plot, it does more than poke fun at the characters. It raises questions about how durable the script really is. Jost subtly pointed out how often Trump's messaging revolves around the idea that strength is demonstrated through aggressive counterattacks. The irony, of course, is that responding forcefully to comedians elevates them into direct opponents rather than background noise. By pushing back against the jokes so strongly, the campaign effectively confirmed their importance, turning what could have been a brief punchline into a controversy that lasted several days. Attempting to dismiss the humor as meaningless looked inconsistent when the rebuttals themselves sounded urgent.
This week, Trump declared himself the acting president of Venezuela. By next week, he will be the interim Ayatollah of Iran, and then on to his ultimate goal, head reindeer of Greenland. In fact, a congressman has introduced a bill to make Greenland the 51st state. Meanwhile, Puerto Rico's like, wow, okay.
Without missing a beat, Michael Che pushed that contradiction even further by focusing on tone. He suggested that constant indignation can start to look less like genuine belief and more like a carefully managed brand, especially when every form of criticism, from reporters to prosecutors to comedians, gets grouped under the same label of coordinated hostility. The exaggeration resonated because it mirrored a real trend in modern political language, where nuance often disappears in favor of dramatic framing. Karoline Leavitt's presence during the entire storm revealed another underlying tension. As a spokesperson, she must defend a political figure known for speaking without filters, which means the defensive strategy has to change rapidly whenever a new headline appears. The satire hinted that this constant adjustment sometimes produces a kind of rhetorical whiplash, where yesterday's explanation quietly fades away to make room for today's message. Delivered through humor, that observation carried more bite than a direct accusation ever could. The segment also tapped into a growing exhaustion among many voters, who feel stuck inside an endless cycle of controversy followed by rebuttal. By compressing years of scandals, counter-scandals, and defensive responses into just a few tightly arranged jokes, the comedians revealed how repetitive the pattern has become. The laughter that followed was not just amusement, it sounded like recognition from an audience that has watched the same storyline unfold across American politics for nearly a decade.
Last week, President Trump hosted multiple events at the Kennedy Center, including an award ceremony for Sylvester Stallone, Gloria Gaynor, and rock band Kiss, as well as a musical performance by the Village People. Which raises the question, is Donald Trump a gay man from 1978?
There is a strange symmetry in watching a political movement that once mastered viral outrage struggle when that same viral energy suddenly turns comedic. Trump's early success on social media showed how effectively he could command the world's attention. But attention itself is a neutral currency. It spreads applause and parody with equal speed. When clips from the Jost and Chase segment began traveling across platforms, they moved along the same digital pathways that once amplified Trump's own posts. The comedy quietly suggested that modern campaigns now operate less like traditional political organizations and more like media studios, constantly producing content, shaping reactions, and tracking engagement. Within that environment, Leavitt becomes more than just a spokesperson. She becomes a recurring character in an ongoing narrative that plays out across television and social media. The satire implied that once politics adopts an episodic storytelling style, it must also accept episodic criticism. Ultimately, the sharpest edge of the roast came from refusing to treat outrage as something sacred. By portraying indignation as predictable and almost mechanical, the segment challenged the emotional engine driving the campaign's messaging. If outrage can be anticipated, timed, and even parodied before it arrives, it begins to lose some of its power. That realization, more than any single joke, explains why the reaction felt so intense.